Danny Marsh was nobody special, and he had accepted this fact a long time ago. He worked the night shift as a maintenance technician aboard orbital station Kepler 7, which was an old refueling depot floating in the cold darkness between Earth and the outer colonies. The station was forgotten by most people in the galaxy, and the workers who staffed it were equally forgettable. Danny cleaned floors, fixed broken pipes, replaced burned-out lights, and kept his head down while doing all of it. The Galactic Concord had accepted humanity into their alliance 50 years ago, but humans were only tolerated and never truly respected. The Valorians had telepathic powers that could read minds across great distances. The Kreth had technology so advanced it seemed like magic, and the Tharn were warriors so powerful that a single one could defeat an entire human army. Humanity had none of these gifts. Their role in the galaxy was simple and sad: manual labor, service work, and staying out of everyone's way. Danny's supervisor was a four-armed Kreth named Voss, who barely looked at him when giving orders. His co-workers shuffled through their duties in tired silence, and nobody ever asked Danny about his dreams, or his thoughts, or his hopes for the future. He was 34 years old, and invisible to the universe. One night, everything changed forever. Danny had been assigned to clean out an abandoned cargo bay that nobody had entered in decades. The bay was filled with forgotten equipment, broken containers, and layers of dust so thick that he could write his name in it. He was pushing aside a pile of old machinery when his flashlight caught something strange buried underneath. It was a sphere about the size of a basketball, and it was made of some kind of crystal that Danny had never seen before. The sphere was glowing with soft light that cycled through colors Danny could not name. Some of the colors did not even seem real, as if they existed outside of normal vision. Heat radiated from the surface, but when Danny reached down and touched it, the warmth felt gentle and welcoming, rather than dangerous. He knew immediately that he should report this discovery. Protocol demanded that any unusual findings be handed over to Concord authorities right away, and failure to do so could result in punishment. But something stopped him from calling his supervisor. When his fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the sphere, Danny felt something he could not explain. There was a presence inside, something ancient and vast and terribly alone, and it seemed to recognize him somehow. The feeling was like meeting someone you had known your whole life, but had somehow forgotten until this exact moment. Danny wrapped the sphere in his work jacket and carried it back to his small quarters without telling anyone. He hid it under his bed and spent the rest of his shift thinking about what he had found. Over the following weeks, the sphere began to change. Tiny cracks appeared across its crystalline surface, and the light within grew stronger and brighter with each passing day. Danny spent every free moment sitting beside it, talking to it in soft whispers, keeping it warm with blankets, and cleaning its surface with gentle hands. He did not understand why he felt so protective of this strange object. The feeling made no logical sense, but it was undeniable and powerful. Other workers noticed that Danny seemed different lately. He smiled more often. He walked with more energy, and there was a spark in his eyes that had not been there before. Nobody asked him about it, because nobody ever asked Danny about anything. On the 23rd night after he found the sphere, Danny woke up to a sound like breaking glass. He jumped out of bed and found the sphere sitting in the middle of his floor, covered in a web of cracks, with brilliant light pouring out from inside. And then it hatched. The creature that emerged was unlike anything Danny had ever seen or imagined. It was serpentine, like a snake, but covered in scales that shifted color constantly like oil floating on water. And it had 4 wings that seemed to exist partially outside of normal space. Its head was crowned with 6 eyes arranged in a circle, and each eye glowed with intelligence that went far beyond anything human. The creature was small, about the size of a house cat, and it was wet and trembling from its emergence into the world. Danny knelt down slowly, not wanting to frighten it, and he held out his hand with his palm facing upward. The creature looked at him with all 6 of its eyes, studying him for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. And then it spoke directly into his mind, without making any sound at all. "You are my guardian," the voice said, and it was ancient and powerful, and somehow also gentle. "You chose me when no one else would, and you cared for me when you had no reason to expect anything in return. We are bonded now, little human, and the universe will remember your name." Danny sat back on his heels, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am called many things by many species," the creature replied, and its mental voice carried echoes of sadness and ancient memory. "The closest word in your language would be dragon, but I am something far older and far more powerful than the dragons of your mythology. I am a celestial worm, and my kind once flew between the stars when the oldest species of the Concord were still learning to make fire." "I thought dragons were just stories," Danny said. "Your species is young, and there is much you do not know about the universe," the worm replied. "My kind were hunted to extinction 10,000 years ago by the founders of the Concord. They feared our power and what we could do when bonded to other beings, so they murdered every last one of us, or so they believed." The creature crawled up Danny's arm and coiled around his shoulders, its scales warm against his skin. "My egg was hidden by the last of my kind, placed somewhere that would be overlooked for millennia," she continued. "A cargo bay on a forgotten station, in a sector of space that nobody important ever visits. My mother believed that one day the right person would find me." "And that person is me?" Danny asked, struggling to believe it. "I am just a janitor. I clean floors and fix pipes. There is nothing special about me." "You are wrong," the worm said firmly. "You found me when no one else did, and instead of reporting me for a reward, you chose to protect me. You talked to me, and kept me warm, and treated me with kindness, even though you had no idea what I was. That is not ordinary behavior, Danny Marsh. That is extraordinary." She pressed her head against his cheek in a gesture that felt like affection. "My name is Athos," she said, "and together we are going to change everything." Danny sat in his small quarters on a forgotten station at the edge of nowhere, with an ancient dragon wrapped around his shoulders, and he realized that his life would never be the same again. The universe had overlooked him for 34 years. It was about to start paying attention. In the days that followed the hatching, Danny learned many things about his new companion and about himself. Athos grew quickly, stretching from the size of a house cat to nearly 6 feet long within just 2 weeks. She could coil around Danny's shoulders and torso like a living scarf, her warm scales hidden beneath his work uniform. Nobody on the station noticed anything different about Danny, because Athos had the ability to bend the way people perceived reality. She could make herself invisible to anyone she did not want to see her, and she could make Danny seem completely ordinary to everyone around him. To his coworkers and his supervisor, Danny was still the same quiet janitor who cleaned floors and fixed pipes without complaint. They had no idea that he carried an ancient being of immense power everywhere he went. But Danny himself was changing in ways he could not hide from his own mind. The bond with Athos had altered something deep inside him. His senses became sharper than they had ever been, allowing him to hear whispered conversations from across a room and see details that would have been invisible to him before. He could feel the emotions of the people around him, like changes in air pressure. When his supervisor Voss was angry, Danny felt it as a hot wind against his skin, and when his coworkers were sad, he felt it as a cold weight in his chest. His mind worked faster than it ever had, making connections and understanding concepts that would have confused him just weeks earlier. Most importantly, Aethys shared knowledge with him through their bond. She showed him truths about the universe that no human had ever understood before. "Your species is young," Aethys explained one night, as Danny sat in his quarters, eating dinner. She did not eat food like humans did, preferring to consume metals and energy instead, but she always stayed close during meals. "Being young is not the same as being weak," she continued. "The older races of the galaxy have forgotten what it means to grow and adapt and hunger for more. They have become comfortable and lazy and afraid of change. Humanity still burns with potential that they cannot even imagine." "The Concord does not see it that way," Danny said with bitterness in his voice. "To them, we are just cheap workers good for cleaning their stations and serving their meals." "The Concord is a dying institution," Aethys replied, and her mental voice carried grief that was 10,000 years old. "It was built on the bones of my people and held together by fear and lies. The founding species hunted the celestial worms because they were terrified of what we could do. They believed that by destroying us, they could keep their power forever." "What happened to all the other worms?" Danny asked quietly. "My brothers and sisters were slaughtered, one by one," Aethys said. "The founders used weapons designed specifically to kill us, and they showed no mercy to eggs or hatchlings. My mother hid me in the most overlooked place she could find, a human cargo bay on a station that nobody important would ever visit." She paused, and Danny felt her ancient pain through their bond. "She died protecting my hiding place," Aethys continued. "Her last act was to ensure that the founders would never find me. She believed that someday the right person would come along and discover my egg." "Why a human?" Danny asked. "Why not hide the egg somewhere that a more powerful species would find it?" "Because power was never what my kind sought in a bondmate. We looked for kindness and compassion and the willingness to care for something without expecting reward. The older species have lost those qualities, but humanity still possesses them in abundance." The situation on the station changed dramatically 3 weeks after Aethys hatched. A Concord inspection vessel arrived without warning, carrying a delegation of officials who wanted to conduct routine compliance reviews. This happened from time to time, and normally it was nothing to worry about. But this time was different. The leader of the delegation was a Valorian telepath named High Assessor Kyra Vallis. She was tall and pale with silver eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them, and she had the ability to read minds with ease. The moment Kyra stepped onto the station, she stopped walking, and her face went even paler than usual. Her telepathic powers reached out automatically to scan the minds around her. But instead of the weak human thoughts she expected, she encountered something vast and ancient and completely impenetrable. "There is something here," Kyra reported to her superiors through her communication device, and her voice was shaking. "Something old and powerful that should not exist anywhere in the galaxy." Within hours, the entire station was locked down. Concord security forces flooded through the corridors, conducting searches of every deck and every room. They carried weapons and scanning devices, and they questioned everyone they encountered. Danny watched all of this from the shadows of the maintenance shaft, where he had hidden when the lockdown began. Aethys was coiled around him, her scales cool against his skin, as she kept them both invisible to searchers. "They cannot find us if we do not wish to be found," she assured him through their mental link. "My abilities are far beyond what their technology can detect," said Danny. "But we cannot hide forever. They know something is here, and they will not stop looking until they find it." "You are correct," Aethys agreed. "Eventually you will have to make a choice. You can hide for the rest of your life, running from station to station and always looking over your shoulder. Or you can stand before the galaxy and declare what you truly are." "What am I?" "You are my bonded," Aethys replied, and her mental voice was warm with affection. You are the first human in 10,000 years to form a connection with a celestial worm. You are the beginning of something that the Concord feared so much they committed genocide to prevent it. Danny thought about his life before he found the egg. He remembered the invisibility, the dismissal, the quiet acceptance of being nothing special in a galaxy full of amazing beings. He remembered being overlooked by everyone and everything. "I am tired of hiding," he said quietly. "I am tired of being invisible and unimportant. If I have to choose between hiding forever and standing up for something, then I choose to stand." Aethys pressed her head against his cheek, and he felt her approval and her pride flowing through their bond. "Then let us give them something to see," she said. "Let us show the galaxy what happens when they overlook humanity for too long." Danny took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. Tomorrow, he would surrender himself to the Concord forces. Tomorrow, everything would change. Danny walked into the main concourse of the station the next morning, with his head held high and his heart beating fast. Dozens of armed security personnel from multiple species had gathered in the large open space. There were Tharn warriors, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with muscles like steel cables, Kreth technicians carrying scanning equipment in their forearms, and Valorian telepaths with their silver eyes watching everything. High Assessor Kyra Vallis stood at the center of them all, her pale face tight with tension, and her mind constantly reaching out to search for the source of the power she had sensed. Danny stopped walking, about 20 feet away from her, and spoke in a calm voice. "I am the one you are looking for." Every eye in the concourse turned toward him, and Kyra immediately launched a telepathic probe at his mind. Her power struck like a hammer, designed to crack open human thoughts like eggs. Instead, her probe shattered against something immense and impenetrable. Kyra staggered backward, with her hands clutching her head, gasping in pain and shock. She had never encountered anything that could resist her power so completely. "That is impossible," she whispered. "What are you?" In answer to her question, Aethys revealed herself. She uncoiled from around Danny's body and began to grow, her form expanding rapidly until she filled the entire concourse. Her scales blazed with inner light that cycled through colors no eye could name, and her 6 eyes surveyed the assembled forces with calm superiority. The Tharn warrior closest to Danny dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. His species feared nothing in the known galaxy, but they had ancient genetic memories of creatures like this, and those memories screamed at him to submit. Several of the Kreth technicians fainted on the spot, and even Kyra Vallis could only stare with her mouth hanging open. "I am Aethys, last daughter of the celestial worms," Aethys announced, and her mental voice broadcast to every mind within range. 10,000 years ago, the ancestors of your founding species murdered my people. They believed they had erased us from existence forever. They were wrong." She coiled her massive body around Danny protectively, her scales forming a barrier between him and the weapons that were still pointed in his direction. "This human found my egg when no one else would," she continued. "He cared for me when he had no reason to expect any reward. He is my bonded, and through our connection, he carries the legacy of my kind." Her head lowered until she was looking directly into Kyra's silver eyes. "You will not harm him," Aethys said, and her voice carried absolute authority. "You will not dismiss him or his species any longer. The time of humanity being overlooked has come to an end." The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting the story. A human maintenance worker from a forgotten station had bonded with a celestial worm, a creature that the Concord had believed extinct for 10 millennia. Emergency sessions were convened by governments and councils throughout the galaxy. Ancient records were desperately searched for information about worms and their bonded partners. Military forces were mobilized, though nobody was quite sure what they were supposed to do against a being of such power. On Earth, the reaction was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. For 50 years, humans had been treated as lesser beings by the galactic community. They had been given the worst jobs, denied representation in important councils, and told repeatedly that they were too young and too primitive to matter. Now they had something that the galaxy could not ignore. News feeds played the recording of Athis revealing herself over and over again. Danny Marsh became a name that every human knew, and his face appeared on screens, from New York to New Beijing to the colonies on Mars. Protests erupted outside Concord embassies across Earth, with millions of people demanding equal treatment and recognition. The signs they carried said things like, "Humanity rises, and we will not be overlooked." Danny found himself transported from the station to a massive judicial complex in the heart of Concord space. He was brought before the High Council, which consisted of 12 representatives from each of the founding species. They sat in elevated seats arranged in a semicircle, looking down at Danny with expressions that ranged from fear to hatred to grudging respect. Athis rested on his shoulders in her smaller form, her presence giving him courage. "You have disrupted the natural order of the galaxy," declared High Counselor Thren, an ancient Kreth whose body was more machine than flesh. The celestial worms were eliminated for the good of all species. Their power was too dangerous to exist. "You mean too dangerous for anyone except you to have," Danny replied calmly. "You did not destroy them because they were a threat to the galaxy. You destroyed them because you were afraid of what would happen if anyone else had access to that kind of power. You dare to accuse this council?" "I am not finished," Danny interrupted, and his voice hardened. "For 50 years, humanity has been treated like servants. We have been told that we are too young and too weak and too primitive to deserve a real voice in galactic affairs. But now I understand the truth." He stepped forward, and despite the guards around him, High Counselor Thren leaned back in his seat. "Age does not equal wisdom," Danny continued. "The Concord is 10,000 years old, and what have you done with all that time? You have hoarded power, suppressed any species that might threaten your dominance, and committed genocide against beings who only wanted to share their gifts with others. Humanity is not weak. We are adaptable and determined, and we never give up. And now we have something that you spent millennia trying to destroy forever." Danny smiled, and there was no fear in his expression. "You cannot put this back in the bottle. The galaxy knows about Athis now. They know about our bond, and they are starting to ask questions about what else the Concord has been hiding." The council chamber erupted into chaos as representatives shouted at each other, and guards moved toward Danny with weapons raised. But Athis simply looked at them, and they all stopped moving. "My bonded has spoken the truth," she said. "The age of secrets is over. Humanity will no longer be ignored, and the Concord will answer for its crimes." Danny stood tall before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly who he was and what he was meant to do. The overlooked human had found his voice, and the universe was listening. The months that followed Danny's confrontation with the High Council brought the greatest political upheaval the galaxy had ever seen. Danny became more than just a symbol for humanity. He became a beacon of hope for every species that the Concord had pushed down and kept silent over the millennia. Delegations from dozens of worlds sought him out, traveling great distances just to share their stories of how the founding species had treated them. Each story was worse than the last, revealing a pattern of cruelty and suppression that stretched back thousands of years. The Kelluri were an insectoid species who had been denied membership in the Concord for centuries despite meeting all the requirements. They revealed that Kreth corporations had strip-mined their homeworld and left their people with almost nothing. The Nithari were a quiet species who could not communicate through telepathy like the Valorians. Because of this, The Concord had declared them unintelligent and unworthy of representation. But when Danny met with them, they showed him technologies that were just as advanced as anything the founding species had created. "My kind always knew there were others who suffered as we did," Athos told Danny one night after a particularly difficult meeting with a delegation of refugees. "But we never imagined how deep the corruption went. The founders did not just kill my people. They built an entire system designed to keep everyone else beneath them." "How do we fight something that big?" Danny asked. "The Concord has controlled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They have all the power and all the weapons and all the influence." "They have material power," Athos agreed. "But you have something they lack: the truth. And truth has a way of spreading that no amount of power can stop." With Athos's guidance, Danny began to share everything he learned with the galaxy at large. Human journalists who had been dismissed as primitive suddenly found themselves with the biggest story in history, and they ran with it. News networks that the Concord did not control broadcast interviews with victims of their oppression. Documents that had been hidden for centuries were leaked and published for everyone to see. The lies that had held the galaxy together began to crumble. The Concord's response was predictable and desperate. Unable to attack Danny directly without causing a massive political disaster, they launched a campaign to make him look dangerous and unstable. News outlets they controlled called him a terrorist and a threat to galactic peace. They called Athos a monster from human mythology and suggested that the bond had corrupted Danny's mind. But humanity had learned something important during their years of being pushed aside: how to survive when the powerful wanted you gone. Human media networks proved surprisingly good at fighting back against the propaganda. Human diplomats who had spent decades being underestimated used that experience to build alliances with species the Concord had wronged. Most importantly, Danny refused to be afraid. He accepted every interview request that came his way. He appeared at every public forum that would have him. He visited every world where people wanted to hear the truth. Athos accompanied him everywhere, her presence a constant reminder of what the Concord had tried to destroy. Together, they told stories that the founding species had worked hard to bury. "They called us irrelevant," Danny said in a speech that was eventually seen by trillions of beings across the galaxy. "They looked at humanity and saw nothing worth fearing, nothing worth respecting. They thought we would accept our place at the bottom forever." He paused and looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting his words. "They were wrong. While they were busy dismissing us, we were watching and learning and waiting for our chance. Humanity is done being overlooked, and we will not rest until the galaxy is fair for everyone." The speech went viral across hundreds of worlds. Within weeks, the reform movement had swelled to include representatives from over 40 species who were demanding change. The Concord's founding members found themselves increasingly isolated as old alliances fell apart and new ones formed around Danny and his message. Then came the day that changed everything. Danny was attending a diplomatic conference on a neutral world called Kethris. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to discuss the future of galactic governance, and the atmosphere was hopeful for the first time in living memory. The attack came without warning. A Tharn warrior burst through the conference hall doors, moving faster than any being that size should be able to move. He carried weapons that Danny had never seen before, devices that glowed with dark energy and hummed with deadly power. Later, Danny would learn that these weapons had been designed specifically to kill celestial worms and their bonded partners. They were ancient technology from the time of the genocide, kept hidden for 10,000 years, just in case. The warrior was one of the finest fighters in the galaxy, trained from birth to be a perfect killing machine. He had been promised wealth and power beyond imagination if he completed this mission. He lasted approximately 4 seconds. Aethys moved in ways that seemed impossible, her form blurring through space as if the normal rules of physics did not apply to her. The warrior's weapons dissolved before he could fire them, breaking apart into dust that scattered across the floor. His armor crumbled next, the metal falling away from his body like dead leaves. And then, the warrior himself was simply gone, unmade at the level of his very molecules by a being whose power had been sleeping for 10,000 years. The conference hall fell into stunned silence. Danny stood at the center of the destruction, completely unharmed, with Aethys coiled around him protectively. Her scales were glowing brighter than he had ever seen them, and her 6 eyes were fixed on the doorway where more attackers might appear. But no more came. That, Danny said quietly into the silence, is why the Concord was afraid, and that is why they will never touch humanity again. The assassination attempt proved to be a terrible mistake for whoever had ordered it. Evidence quickly emerged that the attack had been sanctioned by members of the High Council themselves. Communications were intercepted, payments were traced, and the conspiracy was exposed for all to see. The founding species had tried to murder a diplomatic envoy in full view of the galactic community, and they had failed spectacularly. The Reform Coalition demanded an emergency session of the full Galactic Assembly, not just the High Council, but representatives from every member species. It would be the largest gathering of its kind in 3,000 years. Danny agreed to attend and speak. The final confrontation was coming, and humanity was ready. The Great Assembly Hall was the largest enclosed space Danny had ever seen. It stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, with seats rising in tiers toward a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Holographic displays floated throughout the space, allowing the thousands of delegates in attendance to see everything clearly. Representatives from every member species of the Concord had gathered here. Some were tiny beings no larger than Danny's hand, while others were massive creatures that needed special platforms to support their weight. Behind them, holographic screens showed the faces of billions more who were watching from across the galaxy. This was the most important moment in 10,000 years, and nobody wanted to miss it. Danny stood at the center of it all, with Aethys coiled around his shoulders in her smaller form. He looked up at the assembly and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "I did not ask for any of this," he began, and his voice was carried to every ear and mind in the hall. 6 months ago, I was a maintenance worker on a forgotten station. I cleaned pipes and replaced broken lights, and nobody knew my name. He paused and looked around at the thousands of faces watching him. I was invisible and unimportant, exactly what the Concord wanted every human to be. I had accepted that this was my place in the galaxy, and I never imagined that anything would change. But then I found an egg, hidden in an abandoned cargo bay. I found it, and I chose to care for it, instead of reporting it to authorities who would have destroyed it. I made that choice because it felt like the right thing to do. Danny smiled softly. I did not expect power or fame or any reward. I just saw something that needed help, and I helped it. That is what humans do. We find things that need caring for, and we care for them, even when nobody is watching, even when there is nothing in it for us. Aethys raised her head, and her mental voice joined with Danny's words, reaching every mind in the assembly. The founders of this Concord believed that power was something to be hoarded and controlled and feared. She said, "They saw my kind as threats because we shared our abilities freely with those who showed us kindness. They could not understand a bond based on love and respect rather than domination. So they destroyed us," Aethys continued, and ancient grief colored her words. They hunted down every celestial worm in the galaxy and killed them without mercy. They murdered hatchlings, still wet from their eggs, and parents who only wanted to protect their young. They committed genocide because they were afraid of what might happen if anyone else had access to true power. Danny looked directly at the section where the High Council sat, their elevated seats now seeming less impressive, surrounded by so many other voices. "You spent 10,000 years trying to maintain control through fear and lies," he said. "You suppressed any species that showed potential. You hoarded technology that could have helped billions, and you built a system designed to keep everyone else beneath you. That ends today." He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the assembly around him. "Not because Athos and I are going to destroy you. We are not here for revenge. We are here because the galaxy has finally seen the truth, and you cannot put that back into darkness." The vote that followed was overwhelming. Species that had been silent for centuries raised their voices in support of change. Delegates who had never dared to challenge the founding species stood up and demanded accountability. The reform movement had become a wave that could not be stopped. The High Council was dissolved by a margin of votes so large that some observers wondered if it had ever truly represented the will of the galaxy at all. In its place, a new governing body was established, a true representative assembly where every member species had an equal voice, regardless of age or technology or military power. The crimes of the founding species were formally acknowledged in documents that would be preserved forever. Reparations programs were created for the worlds and peoples they had exploited, and the ancient ban on celestial worm bonding was permanently ended. "There are other eggs," Athos had told the assembly. "My ancestors hid them across the galaxy before the genocide, hoping that someday conditions would be right for my kind to return. Now, that day has come. Danny would not be the last bonded human. In time, other eggs would be found, and other bonds would form." On the day the new Galactic Charter was signed, Danny stood on a balcony high above the assembly hall, watching delegates from hundreds of species celebrate a new beginning. Music played, and voices sang in languages he did not understand, and everywhere he looked he saw hope. "We actually did it," he said softly. "You did it," Athos corrected gently. "I provided power, but you provided something far more important, the courage to use that power for others instead of yourself. That is why I chose you, Danny Marsh. That is why the egg waited for a human to find it." "What happens now?" Danny asked. "Now humanity takes its place among the stars," Athos replied, and her mental voice was warm with affection. "Not as servants or laborers or the species that everyone overlooks, but as equals. More than equals, perhaps." She pressed her head against his cheek. "Your species has something that the older races have forgotten," she continued. "You have the ability to grow and change and form connections without calculation or fear. You see beings who need help, and you help them. You find eggs that need warmth, and you keep them safe. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength in the universe." Danny looked out at the celebration below, thinking about everything that had brought him to this moment. He thought about his small quarters on a forgotten station, about the years he had spent being invisible, about the night he had found a glowing sphere buried under layers of dust. He had been nobody special, and in some ways he still felt like that same person. But the galaxy no longer saw him that way. Humans were no longer overlooked. They never would be again. "The universe ignored us for a long time," Danny said finally. "But we never stopped being who we are. We just kept caring and hoping and waiting for our chance. And when that chance came, you took it," Athos said. "You took it not for power or glory, but because you saw something alone in the darkness, and you refused to leave it there." Danny smiled, feeling the warmth of his bond with Athos flowing through him like sunlight. "That is just what humans do," he said. And for the first time in 50 years, the galaxy understood what that truly meant. The overlooked species had risen, not through conquest or domination, but through something far more powerful, the simple choice to care when caring cost everything. The universe had noticed humanity at last, and it would never forget them again.